Committee on Financial Services and General Government will come to order. I'd like to welcome Mayor Muriel, Mayor of the District of Columbia, Phil Mendelson, Chair of the Council of DC, and Glen Lee, DC's Chief Financial Officer. I appreciate all of you participating in today's hearing to give members of the subcommittee the opportunity to discuss the District of Columbia's fiscal year 2025 budget request and exercise oversight over the city policies and funding. It's been nearly 15 years. I was amazed to find that out myself, since the DC mayor has testified before the subcommittee and 16 years since the chair of the council or CFO testified. It is my hope that we can use this conversation today as a starting point for continued dialogue and partnership. As chairman of this subcommittee, I have prioritized connecting with agencies under our jurisdiction to better understand their budget requests and the utilization of funds that are appropriated by Congress. I intend to maintain the same standard with the district. So once again, it is good to have you before the committee today for what I intend to be a regular meeting, and not every 15 years. The district fiscal 2025 budget to Congress proposes $932 million for the District of Columbia, which is $142 million above the enacted level. Notably, $47 million of this increase is due to a need for more emergency preparedness funding for the upcoming presidential inauguration. As member of the House Task Force on the attempted assassination of Donald Trump, I take emergency preparedness very seriously, particularly when it comes to protecting President-elect Trump and all political leaders. With that said, the request still represents a large increase in the district's overall appropriation from Congress. So I look forward to specific dialogue on the district's budgetary needs to ensure a safe and smooth transition of power for President-elect Trump. In addition to funding, the House FSGG bill contains several general provisions that restrict the actions of the district. I'm aware that there are provisions included in our bill, both new and long-standing, with which you disagree. While we may agree on the desire to review and modify one of these provisions in particular, the restriction on the regulation of cannabis and cannabis products in order to ensure the district has authority to promote public safety, it is worth noting that each of these provisions are based on member requests in response to serious concerns with actions taken or not taken by the district. Congress will continue to maintain its constitutional authority and responsibility to exercise authority over the district's law and budgets. Particularly over the last few years, this need for oversight has become more apparent. For example, we have included a provision to prohibit the city from allowing non-citizens to vote in local elections. There is nothing more vital to the continuance of democracy than free and fair elections. As such, the right to vote is and must continue to be reserved for U.S. citizens and U.S. citizens only. Such a provision should not be necessary, but unfortunately, due to the district's actions to allow and promote non-citizen voting, it is. I look forward to further dialogue on this topic today. Additionally, I hope to have a robust conversation on the impact of federal government's telework policy on the district. This subcommittee has jurisdiction over funding for the General Services Administration and the Office of Personnel Management, two agencies that oversee federal space and personnel policy. It has been a shared goal of many on the committee, and I trust all the witnesses here today, to get our federal employees back to the office and ensure we're not throwing taxpayer dollars away by continuing to pay for unused space in federal buildings in the district. These telework policies have impacted our government in many ways, but they've had a particularly acute impact on the safety and economic stability of the District of Columbia. Once again, I thank you all for being here today. I look forward to the dialogue on these topics and more. Now I turn to our ranking member, Mr. Hoyer, for his opening remarks.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to recognize and welcome to our committee the Governor of the District of Columbia, President of their unicameral legislature, Mr. Mendelson, and what we would call in our state the comptroller, with whom I had the opportunity to meet just recently. By all accounts, the District of Columbia is in good shape and doing well. The city's finances are in good order. Would that the country were in a similar situation. Its economy continues to recover and grow, and workers have gradually returned to the office, although, as the chairman has indicated, not as rapidly as I think the city would like, and not as rapidly as perhaps all of us would like. Crime is decreasing, contrary to some allegations. Its population is increasing. a very good indicator of the health of a city, particularly when we see so many cities having declining populations. We owe these encouraging trends in no small part to the guidance of its leaders, especially those of us, Mr. Chairman, before us today. Their accomplishments are even more impressive in light of the efforts of some in the Congress to interfere with D.C. home rule, which posited that democracy is critically important and that the District of Columbia, as it relates to its city and its operations, should have, and the Congress adopted this, the President signed the premise that they ought to have home rule and not be simply have the Congress as an overseer. This has been a Congress, a historic Congress in terms of meddling in D.C.'s affairs. Members have tried to insert themselves into the governance of this great city, wading into local issues that ought to stay local, subject to the citizens of the District of Columbia's judgment. From a concealed carry restriction on WMATA to the right to turn on red and everything in between. Washingtonians know how to govern themselves. They don't need members from thousands of miles away to weigh in on the specifics of how they run their city or to overrule what residents of D.C. want for themselves. Protecting home rule is absolutely vital to D.C.'s continued success. And as a Maryland member, I can tell you just how crucial D.C.'s success is to the region's success. It is the heart of our region. I believe that the best way to ensure D.C.'s vitality is to grant them statehood. We passed that through the Congress of the United States in the 117th Congress, so that D.C.'s 700,000 citizens, larger than the state of Wyoming, who now lack proper representation in Congress, runs against everything our Constitution stands for. One man, one vote, except if you move from Maryland into the District of Columbia, or move from Virginia into the District of Columbia, or move from Ohio into the District of Columbia, or move from any of our states into the District of Columbia, when then, certainly the founders did not intend this, lose their vote as an American citizen in large part. Our framers did not intend for Americans to be without representation in the Congress of the United States. Considering that D.C. would be the state with the highest proportion of black residents in the nation, the lack of statehood also has disturbing implications for voting rights and equality in our country. I am eager to hear from our witnesses about the progress their city has made in spite of these obstacles. Again, I welcome all three of you, representatives of a city that is my favorite city. Now, I live in the suburbs, but I believe Washington, a unique city, a capital city, a designed city, is as beautiful and functional a capital as we have in the world. So I welcome all three of you here representing that city. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Hoyer. Mayor Bowser, without objection, your full written testimony will be entered into the record. With that in mind, we'd ask that you please summarize your opening statement in 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Okay, all right, there. It's red. Now you can hear me. Okay. Thank you, Chairman Joyce and Ranking Member Hoyer and members of the subcommittee. And we are just very pleased to be here. And 15 years is too long, and we're happy to join you today to explain the state of the district. I'm Muriel Bowser. I'm Mayor of Washington, D.C. I'm joined today by Council Chairman Phil Mendelson, the Chairman of the Council of the District of Columbia, and Chief Financial Officer Glen Lee. I'm also joined by members of my team. I want to thank you for the opportunity to appear today to share our economic vision and the financial priorities of our city. And so with no uncertainty, Washington, D.C. Is a well-run city. And notwithstanding the great cities represented on this dais, we believe the best city in the world. We navigate the functions of a city, county, state, school district, and state. And like Mr. Hoyer said, we're unique, we're different. We comply with the designation of a state in more than 500 federal laws. Our finances are strong. We have balanced 29 consecutive budgets, achieved a AAA bond rating, and are the envy of mayors and governors across the country because of our strong finances. We have a $21 billion budget, which, like other states, is mostly generated through local revenues. We are a donor state, meaning we pay more in federal taxes than we get back. We are a model for our family-friendly policies like free pre-K that is universally applied and paid family leave. Our park system is consistently ranked the best in the nation. We have a strong and effective public school system of choice with both traditional public schools and public charter schools. And unlike many urban school districts, our school enrollment has also increased for the past 3 years. Crime is trending sharply down, and unlike many of our peer cities, our population is growing. So I say without equivocation, the state of the nation's capital is strong. And today is my hope that we will talk about our shared priorities to make our nation's capital even stronger. Our current budget is focused on 3 priority areas: public safety, education, and our downtown. And so when it comes to ensuring that our communities are safe for our residents, workers, and visitors alike, DC is putting its money behind proven strategies for reducing crime. We have been laser focused on rebalancing our public safety ecosystem to focus mostly on accountability. So I am pleased to report that violent crime in the district is down 35% compared to last year, with a nearly 50% reduction in carjackings. When we look at neighborhoods close to here, for example, violent crime is down 57% in Capitol Hill and 56% in the Navy Yard. And we see similar trends across all 8 wards. And we're committed to continuing those downward trends. Our local MPD budget increased by approximately 13%, fully funding the chief's request. I'm pleased to say that Chief Pamela Smith has joined us here today, and as she develops her budget for MPD, I look forward to fully supporting that request to get us back to 4,000 officers. The fiscal 25 budget also includes increased funding for DCPS and DC public charter schools, and we frequently refer to the nation's report card or innate results that show that DCPS has remained the single fastest improving urban school district 10 years running. This budget also makes catalytic investments in the downtown. Our downtown action plan is funded with more than $500 million to fuel our comeback and keep our basketball and hockey teams in DC where they belong. So we have prioritized efficiency savings as well over the last several budgets. I'll mention a few. We've left no stone unturned in looking for good government efficiencies, including eliminating vacancies, negotiating better contracts and leases, consolidating IT purchases, eliminating outdated technology, and even turning off devices that we are no longer using. We made the tough decision to discontinue a local bus service called the DC Circulator and double down on our investments in WMATA, in Metro. In doing so, we know that we are investing in America's subway system and making sure that we are attracting our riders back. In fact, Metro has made a remarkable comeback. It is a vital part of the National Capital Region's infrastructure, and we look forward to working with the committee on ways to invest in Metro. I'm over time, Mr. Chairman, but I look forward to talking to you about how our tourism has come back, how our emergency planning fund is so critical to the safety of the inauguration transition in the nation's capital.
Thank you, Mayor Bowser. Chair Mendelson, without objection, your full written testimony will be entered into the record. With that in mind, we would ask for you also to please summarize your statement in 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Joyce, Ranking Member Hoyer, members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me. Last week, I submitted a lengthy statement, which I'm summarizing today. I want to highlight 3 issues. First, fiscally, the district is a model for other states and cities. Second, even though Congress has imposed fiscal burdens. Third, we seek statehood in part to improve our fiscal situation. First, the district is a financial model because our police, fire, and teacher pension system is 99.5% funded. Our OPEB fund is fully funded. Actuarial assumptions for each are conservative. Our reserve funds are at or near the gold standard of 60 days cost of operations. We have an independent chief financial officer. Our budget is based on the independent CFO's revenue estimates. For 29 years, we have adopted balanced budgets and ended each year with a surplus. Balanced. That includes both the forthcoming fiscal year as well as a 4-year financial plan. No other jurisdiction can boast all of this. Moreover, while Congress decreed that our borrowing can never exceed 17% of annual expenditures, we enacted our own law that limits borrowing to 12%. And while Congress requires us to maintain 2 reserve funds, we enacted our own law establishing 2 additional reserve funds. We also are requiring, through local law, increased utilization of pay-as-you-go financing of capital projects in lieu of borrowing. Further, we require long-range capital planning, and the Chief Financial Officer has developed a capital asset replacement scheduling system to bring greater discipline to our 6-year capital budget. Financially, the district is healthy, and our revenues are consistently growing, despite challenges such as a largely teleworking federal workforce. We are a leader in public education with almost $3.3 billion in the budget. Our teacher salaries are competitive. Our charter school sector is robust. We provide universal pre-K education. On a per capita basis, we are a leader in funding the creation and maintenance of affordable housing, a difficult task in an expensive market. And in each of the past 4 years, we have fully funded our police department's efforts to retain and attract police officers in a market where jurisdictions across the country have struggled with recruitment. Right now, retirements are at their lowest in a decade, and our recruitment classes are growing in size. However, we have had to overcome federally created impediments. First, our relationship with the federal government is expressly cited by the Wall Street ratings agencies as a risk factor. Congress's inability to adopt appropriation acts on time, fights over the debt ceiling, the too often threats of a government shutdown. These federal problems increase our cost of borrowing. Second, nearly half the land in the district is federal or international and therefore tax exempt. The total foregone tax revenue for this is estimated at over $2 billion. Unlike many states, the district receives no federal payment for this. Third, the prohibition on taxing income at its source. We are the only jurisdiction with the inability to tax income at its source. The foregone revenue could be significant, but here again, there is no federal payment to offset this congressional prohibition. Fourth, Congress perennially refuses to fully reimburse the district's police department and related agencies for public safety expenses directly related to the federal presence. The district willingly protects public safety, but was unreimbursed a total of $83 million in the past 4 years. For fiscal year 2025, the House would appropriate $20 million less than is needed for emergency planning and security, such as the police. And then Congress adds riders to its appropriation bill for the district. Most damaging is the prohibition on our regulating the sale or distribution of recreational cannabis. This rider dates back a decade and is responsible for a black market estimated at over $600 million annually. Over half the states permit recreational cannabis, but we are the only one that cannot regulate it. This is an urgent matter since, as time goes by, not only will it be more difficult to displace the illegal businesses, but in the meantime, the illegal gifting stores attract violent crime due to their cash-only nature and the illegality of their activity. Our police try to shut down the illegal stores, and the United States Attorney declines to prosecute. The congressional rider has had a negative impact on public safety. Other riders, such as proposing to prohibit automated traffic enforcement, will not only impact our budget, but will facilitate reckless driving on our streets, including red light running. These are just some of the reasons you hear district residents and leaders demanding statehood. I know this Congress is not receptive, but statehood would give the district financial stability, remove counterproductive impediments, and improve our ability to control the public fisc. Finally, my longer submitted statement ends with a list of opportunities for Congress and the district to work together. They include additional measures that would improve public safety, such as adequately resourcing the United States Attorney for the district, adequately funding our courts, confirming the appointment of our judges, and enabling the mayor to call out the National Guard. I appreciate this opportunity to testify, and thank you for the invitation.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Mendelson. Mr. Lee, without objection, your full written testimony will be entered into the record. We would ask that, with that in mind, that you would summarize your statement in 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Joyce, Ranking Member Hoyer, and members of the subcommittee. It's really good to be with you this morning. My name is Glen Lee, and I'm the Chief Financial Officer of the Government of the District of Columbia. My organization is an independent agency created by Congress to ensure the district's financial integrity and fiscal sustainability. I am here today to give you our latest views of both the economy as well as our financial condition. Stated simply, the district's financial condition is strong despite challenges brought on by remote work. There's 3 reasons for this. First, the district has a high-wage, high-knowledge-based economy driven by a substantial and stable presence of the federal government or companies that support the federal government. In addition, thank you. In addition, there are a multitude of employers who support the federal decision-making processes, including a large contingent of international organizations that provide stable and high-wage jobs. As a result of this, the district's economy is historically resilient, often buffered from downturns faced by other metro areas in the U.S. Second, the district's financial practices are strong. The district government adopts annually a 5-year financial plan. The benefit of a 5-year financial plan is it allows elected leaders to consider both program objectives as well as longer-term trends in costs, revenues, and liquidity. As was mentioned earlier, as far as I know, this is the only place in the country with that kind of financial requirement. In addition to this, the district has very strong budget controls. It has reserves, not only those established by Congress, but additional ones established by the district that are there for unforeseen expenses or liquidity management. And finally, the financial transactional controls that are in place have resulted in clean financial audits for 27 consecutive years. Very proud of that. Finally, the district's actual condition is good. Our pension obligations are fully funded. That's very rare for major jurisdictions, either at the state or local level. Our debt levels are manageable. Our reserves that we've described represent about 18.5% of our general fund spending when they're fully funded. And in addition to the reserves, we currently have a fund balance of about 25%. Now, it's true that that fund balance is part of our spending plan over the next 4 years, but we will work very hard with the local leaders to ensure that the remaining financial condition at the end of the 4-year period, our current planning horizon, has enough reserves and fund balances to support the district's liquidity needs. As a result of these three conditions, the district has a AAA rating. Having earned a AAA rating is a rare event, surprisingly. Only 10 of the largest 25 cities have AAA ratings in 12 of the 50 states. However, there are headwinds. The district faces headwinds in our economy, primarily resulting from remote work. Many economists believe that remote work is a transformational change in the employment market for office-based workers. Time will tell. It's hard to know right now, but time will tell. Nonetheless, in many major cities, including the district, office utilization remains 50% of what it was prior to the pandemic. For the district, this means that on any given day, there's 100 to 250,000 fewer people commuting in the district to work in our offices. Fewer workers means less economic activity, which ultimately leads to lower tax revenue growth. In fact, our current forecasts estimate our revenues will grow at maybe slightly above the rate of inflation over the next 4 years. This is in stark contrast to rather robust growth prior to the pandemic and even the couple of years after the pandemic when the economy was recovering. A slow growth environment will lead our elected officials to do any of the following combination of items. First, slow the rate of growth, and you heard the mayor describe some of the initiatives adopted in our last budget, increase taxes or other revenues, and implement economic development initiatives that increase the tax base significantly in the long run. In conclusion, the district's high-wage, historically resilient economy and its current sound financial condition position the district leaders well to manage the district through economic headwinds, both those we know about and those yet to be seen. Thank you very much, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. We'll now begin our questions. Each member will have 5 minutes for their questions and answers. When the timer turns yellow, you will have 1 minute remaining. First, I will recognize myself. In the fiscal year 2025 congressional budget requests, the city requested $97 million for the emergency planning and preparedness. $47 million of that request was allocated for expenses surrounding the upcoming presidential inauguration. That funding resolution was fulfilled in September continuing resolution. We have subsequently received a request for additional funding for the inauguration as well as money for other emergency preparedness purposes. Of course, we need to take all necessary precautions to ensure safety and security standards are met. While funding for police, fire, and emergency medical services and Homeland Security make up the bulk of that request, the funding request is a significant increase from what was requested in 2021. Mayor Bowser, can you explain the additional funding needs in more detail? And is every dollar requested intended for reimbursing federal expenses related to the inauguration?
Mostly, it reflects increases in inaugural costs, but also all of the costs that MPD incurs because of our special federal status and how we support the federal government. So the Metropolitan Police Department is our local DC police, and we support the Secret Service on movements of dignitaries. We support federal land in the district where there are First Amendment activities or protests or demonstrations, and we support big events like the 4th of July, of course, and the inauguration. What we've seen since 2021 that you reference, in 2021 we had about 524 such events. Last year we had 1,525 such events. So we are detailing our police officers and accounting for additional time, largely, that our MPD is supporting those events. We also think that inaugural costs are increasing. You have mentioned the threat environment that is different in this inauguration, even in previous inaugurations where there's always a high level of security. As you know, these are designated national special security events under the leadership of the United States Secret Service. We work hand in hand with the service to support the security of the event. Our expectation is even that the additional $3 million that we have requested is based on the costs that are coming in.
And I'd like to have you expound on how is the city partnering with Capitol Police, Secret Service, and other federal law enforcement to ensure the safety and security of President-elect Trump, Vice President-elect Vance, and all those who will be in attendance at the inauguration?
Yes, so the National Special Security Event structure is led by the United States Secret Service. We have a organization that stood up every 4 years called the DC PIC, Presidential Inauguration Committee. There's a similar PIC committee from the Congress, and we work hand in hand with the incoming administration, the Presidential PIC Committee, to ensure that the activities have appropriate support. So the Secret Service organizes all of the security individuals in partnership with the federal law enforcement officials and the Metropolitan Police Department.
At this point, is the city prepared for the inauguration, particularly in terms of having enough police and security officers? And how many memorandums of understanding have been signed with other jurisdictions for an increased police presence for 2025? Do you know by any chance the number of jurisdictions? I remember some being housed in our garages over here
Yes.
in the Capitol Office Building. How many officers have been committed, and how does that compare to 17 and 21?
Well, the chief, actually, we gave a report out yesterday to the DC community, and we would like to have 4,000 officers. I think we're at 3,998, something like that. And the chief
Trending in the right
also
direction.
reported that departments can continue to reach out to her to request, to come and support the activities. So we think in terms of the number of law enforcement officials that we'll have the number that we expect.
Do you believe there'll be enough law enforcement to keep the residents, dignitaries, and visitors safe?
We are certainly going to work through the process, work hand in hand with Secret Service to make sure that any unusual threats, we don't have that type of intelligence at this stage, and we will work to make sure that we have local law enforcement to support the Secret Service's security plan.
I realize I'm about out of time, so I'll now recognize the distinguished gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Hoyer.
Thank you very much. Let me ask you a question as a follow-up to the chairman's question. Obviously, substantial expenses were incurred in 2017, January 6th in particular. Can you tell me the status of the payments that have been made to the District of Columbia to reimburse the added expenses that the security events since January 1, 17 have occurred? Have you been fully reimbursed?
We haven't been fully reimbursed for the inaugurals, and I'm looking now to make sure I know the difference. The original budget, for example, in 2017, we're outstanding $7.3 million for the inaugural expenses and about $2.2 million for other security expenses throughout that year.
Does that
And-
include the January 6th?
January 6 would be in 2021, and we are outstanding 6.2 for the inaugural expenses, and the other expenses, $21.2 million.
So somewhere in the neighborhood of $40 million in
Yes.
that round figure have not been reimbursed by the federal government. Notwithstanding that, obviously, those were federal events, essentially.
Yes,
Thank you.
If I may, in my statement, I noted the total for the past 4 years is $83 million that we expended that was not reimbursed
83 million.
for the 4 years.
So that's part of the expense that you incur because we are the federal government. But for that, probably would not have incurred those particular expenses. You'd obviously have public safety expenses, but not those particular increases.
right, that's correct.
And they were not anticipated, of course.
They were not anticipated.
Let me ask you something. In 2016, you had a referendum on statehood. 86% of your residents voted for that. Citizens, I presume,
Yes.
voted for that. Can you explain that high percentage?
Well, yes, Mr. Hoyer, and in fact, since, that was 2016, I became mayor in 2015, and we were very intent on changing the conversation around statehood, and part of our campaign included rewriting our Constitution, including talking to all of our residents in a constitutional convention and going back out to the voters. And what we explained was the only way to really secure DC autonomy, to make sure that we can speak for all of the residents without interference, is statehood. You've explained already that our population is greater than 2 states. We take care of ourselves. We have addressed constitutional concerns that have been raised regarding DC's admission as a state. And so the House has approved DC's admission 2 times. We've also achieved greater support from our surrounding jurisdictions, including your support, Mr. Hoyer, for statehood for the district.
Thank you very much. As a country, we of course support very strongly self-determination of peoples around the world.
Yes.
In my view, this is a particular example where our principles are not being pursued in a way that reflects that 86% of the people of this jurisdiction, the District of Columbia, or the state of Washington Douglas,
Yes.
would be manifested.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, I think we really ought to do that. I want to observe, first of all, you're correct, I'm sure. For 15 years, we have talked about the District of Columbia on the floor about none of the funds can be used for this, that, or the other. But for 15 years, we have not given them the opportunity to appear before the Congress of the United States and state its case. So not only do we not honor home rule, but we don't honor our responsibility that we discuss hearing from the jurisdiction that is most affected by our decision with reference to the District of Columbia.
Mm-hmm.
I have 10 seconds remaining, so I will yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Hoyer. The chair will now recognize Ms. Henson from Iowa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning.
Good morning.
Madam Mayor, Chair Mendelson, and CFO Lee. Thank you so much for coming before our committee today to answer our questions and talk about the budget. It goes without saying, but one of my top priorities is safety and security for Iowa families. That applies when they come here to the Capitol as well. And when we're hearing from families who are coming here to the Capitol to visit not only our facilities here, but the national monuments as well, we're talking a lot about, obviously, the inauguration coming up in a couple of weeks. Making sure that they can come here and return home safely is a top priority. And while I appreciate that your testimony today outlined some steps that you are taking to improve public safety, I think that people are still concerned about the level of violent crime here in the city. And while we have seen that decline, last year was the district's deadliest in more than 2 decades. It's down, but it's still unacceptably high, is what I would say. So what is your message to Americans who are coming here, who want to be safe and visit the nation's capital, but still knowing that that crime is very, very high?
Well, what I would say, and thank you, Congresswoman, is Americans are coming to the district every single day. In fact, people from around the world are coming to the district every single day. Last year, we broke records in terms of our visitation. We exceeded the pre-pandemic levels, and we had the highest level of visitation in the District of Columbia. So I know that Americans are enjoying the museums. I know that they are taking advantage of our wonderful hotels, great transportation network, going to our restaurants and seeing our shows. We share, however, you will never hear anybody say more loudly than me that any level of violence in our city is unacceptable. We've worked very hard to rebalance our public safety ecosystem following the pandemic that disrupted it. and disrupted it in very fundamental ways. And I think that our focus on accountability and driving down crime and people having illegal access to guns and using guns has been very important. We do, when we come and speak to members of the Congress, and the chairman highlighted it, and I highlighted it as well, we could use some help. As you know, we're different. We have federal appointments to our courts, and we have no ability to replace vacancies on the court. And so the Senate right now has 10 very qualified judges that we hope could get some floor time and get passed.
And obviously, we're trying to do our part in the House with
Thank you.
expanding federal judges and making sure that the case backlog can be addressed. But I think realistically, enabling rhetoric that was unacceptable and anti-police and soft on crime for several years did lead to an increase in crime in the city. And while I'm glad to hear that you are trying to reverse that trend, and people are coming here, that fear still exists. And when you hear 274 homicides in 2023, people, they may have to come here for work and for other things, but they are still certainly afraid. So when you look at arrests that are happening, and you talk about some of these illegal guns that people have, how many of these people are repeat offenders, right? They're being signaled to that they're not going to be held accountable for, whether it's lack of arrests or prosecutions. That's both probably a part of the conversation, but how many people are repeat offenders?
We think that there are a small number of people who are responsible for most crimes. We do think that. We think that people who use guns will tend to use them again. And we look to make sure the ecosystem is working. And that's why we're fully funding our police department. We're looking at our policies to make sure that if they need to be recalibrated, they are being recalibrated. You've heard the chairman ask you to make sure that our United States Attorney's Office has not only the number of people that they need, but highly skilled attorneys that can work in an urban environment. And it is important. We cannot discount the need for swift trials and having the judges that we need help get us there.
Yeah, well, and I certainly think when you think about the message that it sends to police and recruiting police and getting more people into the force, and thanks to the chief for being here today, we want to make sure that those who are arrested are actually prosecuted, because it's tough to be a cop out on the street, putting your life on the line every single day, and then realizing that these people are walking anyway. So I think that's a
couldn't
huge
agree with
fear.
you more on that point.
Okay.
If I could just add.
Yes,
So
Mr. Chair.
we are different than any other jurisdiction in that all of our felonies are prosecuted by the United States Attorney. And as of about a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago, the U.S. Attorney was declining to prosecute over 2/3 of the arrests that were presented to him. That's a significant problem, and that's why I spoke to more resources for the U.S. Attorney's Office. Our courts are backlogged because of the vacancies. That was an article in today's Post about that. That also impacts public safety in the district. Last year, we had about 280 homicides. This year, as of today, we have 182. We will be below 200 this year, so violent crime is coming down. Unfortunately, a challenge with crime is that when their word is that an area is unsafe, it takes a long time to overcome that, even if the statistics show that crime is down significantly.
Well, I certainly think maybe a separate conversation with the district attorney about how they're pursuing these cases as well is worth having as a committee. And Mr. Chair, without objection, I'd like to admit for the record this article from the Washington Post, if I may. Okay, thank you. I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Henson. The chair will now recognize Mr. Pocan for his 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Madam Mayor, Mr. Chair, and Mr. Lee for being here today. First off, I want to say I'm one of those sponsors of the measure for DC statehood. Proud to have voted for that. In fact, I think today you just, in a few minutes, made the case stronger than I think I've heard. You know, the fact that 27 years of passing audits, Department of Defense has failed 7 in a row. That's our record. AAA rating, 10 out of 25 major cities having that. And yet, the problem is we've shortchanged you $83 million over the last 4 years, and we can't pass our budgets on time, and that has ripple effects on how you operate. I'd like to just specifically talk about that. Not only do we have a problem with our review and we don't do that timely, I'd love to hear a little more about that, but also when we don't pass our budgets or we have continuing resolutions, how does that directly impact you know, you've maintained all this, you know, strong financial measures, but we've made it hard. And then when we do meddle, we tell you, you know, what healthcare women can get, what your traffic laws are, a whole lot of other things. Can you just talk a little more about the problems we cause for the district?
Well, first of all, we have and we are able to continue the operations of the district even if the Congress has a discussion whether you're going to continue the operations of the federal government. So that we've been able to separate ourselves with your help from that discussion. Still, it creates a lot of anxiety if there is a discussion in the city about if the Congress will continue to operate. We have the businesses that work with the federal government and Congress concerned. We have some contractors who won't get paid. We have then people who won't get paid, who live in the district, Maryland and Virginia and other places for the federal government. So that continues to be a concern for us. We have, and as the chairman has testified, even our local laws passed democratically by the Council of the District of Columbia are sent to the Congress, and sometimes they're layovers. When I sign our bills, frequently I'm signing bills that I've already signed, but I have to have a congressional emergency because it hasn't been fully approved on the Congress, by the Congress. So there are just inefficiencies in that process that locally elected officials decide, and that should be final at that decision point. I'll turn to the chairman.
Yeah, if I may add, so the mayor noted the instability, which is significant. I noted that the Wall Street ratings agencies note this as a negative factor in their ratings for us. Our debt service, we pay a bit more for debt. When there was the shutdown a few years ago, the city picked up the trash on the mall. That was a cost that we bore. Our revenues drop if there's a shutdown long enough. The chief financial officer has done estimates in the past. But, you know, there'll be just less going on in the city, and therefore our revenues will drop. The public thinks that we are federally funded. And it is true, decades ago, we received a significant federal payment, but we are not federally funded. Our $21 billion budget, I think less than 1% is discretionary federal payments. But the public thinks we are, and so that too adds to the anxiety or the instability when the federal government is going through these tussles over the debt limit or continuing resolutions. The public thinks the district is going to be shut down as well.
Thank you. Just a quick question for the mayor also. January 6th, many of us were around. You didn't have the ability to call out the National Guard.
Right.
Can you talk about that for a second, and if there is a different way you'd be able to handle something like that?
Well, yes. So the DC National Guard, or sometimes say it's a misnomer because it is unlike the Maryland National Guard or the Virginia National Guard that report to the governors of those states. That is not the case in Washington, D.C. The D.C. National Guard reports to the president.
And would you like to have authority to be able to?
We would. We think it's very important. And in fact, you know, the closer that governing is to the people being governed, we think is better, first of all. We would take great pride in it, like we do in all of our public safety agencies like MPD. We believe that we can strengthen recruitment. We believe that we can attract more people to the Guard. And we think it's necessary to be more nimble in cases of emergency.
Thank you. I'll yield back my 1 second.
Thank you, Mr. Pocan. We now recognize Mr. Edwards for his 5 minutes.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Mendelson, you testified that, I believe it was the federal attorney refuses to prosecute marijuana-related crimes. Was that my understanding?
That's basically what I said.
Right. What actions, if any, has the council taken to urge the federal attorneys to prosecute crimes?
We've been quite public about it, that a key factor in reducing crime is prosecuting people when they're arrested. I think the U.S. Attorney was very embarrassed by the Washington Post article that was a summer ago that showed the declination rate around 2/3 of the cases presented. The declination rate has improved, so they are prosecuting more cases. But we rely totally on them for the speed of trials and whether to even try in the first place.
And so I'm specifically interested in the prosecuting the crimes for marijuana-related
Yes.
incidents. Is that to
Yeah,
what
so
you're-
my testimony referred to the fact that when the executive, MPD, goes out and shuts down a store and an illegal store and refers it to the U.S. Attorney's Office, they're declining those prosecutions.
And so, again, can you be more specific in what calls you have made to the U.S. Attorney to prosecute those crimes?
Discussed it mostly publicly. I think I've discussed it over the last couple of years privately with the U.S. Attorney. I mean, they don't come under us. And so we don't have the ability. You have, I mean, you know how frustrating oversight can be, but we have no oversight authority over the U.S. Attorney.
And so are you saying publicly right now that you had rather see the U.S. Attorney prosecute marijuana-related crimes?
Yes. I was referring specifically to the stores, but yes, more broadly. You know, when there's a major drug case, I think they prosecute. But we're talking about these, I call them pop-up stores that do this illegal gifting. They don't have a license. They're selling, in fact, they purport to be selling cannabis. Typically, it is laced with other drugs. It's actually dangerous to human health. And they are, when they have been closed down, because we have started to close them down, there will be other drugs that are found. And it's a real problem, and they're just not getting prosecuted in the courts.
Well, I appreciate your stance towards seeing more prosecutions in D.C. Thank you for that. Mr. Lee, in your testimony, you mentioned that slow revenue growth requires elected officials to reduce growth in spending, increase taxes, or encourage new economic development pathways to expand the tax base. Which of these three avenues have you recommended to the D.C. leadership, and have they taken any of those recommendations?
I think I used the word "and." It takes all three to address slower revenue growth. Appreciate that our role is to support the mayor and council with financial transaction management, constructing a budget. They are responsible for determining each of those sets of policies, whether it's cost growth in programs, what revenues to execute or not, or what deductions we manage in the management of taxes, and certainly economic development initiatives. Now, clearly, we have a wealth of information and tremendous expertise, and we routinely help both the executive and the council assess different programs for a variety of reasons, whether it's program effectiveness or efficiency. And we're happy to do that.
Thank you. Ms. Bowser, 10 years ago, in 2014, there were 3,961 sworn officers and 105 homicides. Today, there are 3,159 sworn officers, and so far this year, there have been 180 homicides, 800 fewer officers, and 75 more deaths. What's changed in the last 10 years, and what, in your opinion, can be done to reverse the trend that we're seeing here in the district?
Well, thank you, Congressman. I'm pleased to say that is not as low as you report, is 3,266 officers. And I would point to 2 years where we were unable to hire police. And we would also point to our trajectory and investments necessary to get there. And we are prepared to make those investments in our upcoming budgets. We've also been very focused on making sure that we have a policy environment in the district where police want to work. And what we are finding is that's happening. Police look to the district and know that they're policing a city, and they're also supporting the federal government. They like the fact that they're working in an urban environment, but also have opportunities for high-level detective work. So we think that we have made the policy changes, the investments in recruiting, the competitive salaries to attract officers.
All right. Thank you. Mr. Chair, I see I'm out of time, so I'll yield.
Thank you, Mr. Edwards. And just to clarify, Chair Mendelson, the District of Columbia has agreed or okayed the sale of cannabis. It's been not allowed because of the direction of some member of Congress or a directive from Congress?
Correct.
So what you're hoping is that the people who are doing it illegally and creating the black market that you said it was how many million?
600 million, that's actually a figure from a couple years ago.
So there's a $600 million black market that's operating because what you wanted to do isn't allowed to because of something that the federal government, a directive from one member, has managed to
Correct.
put into
So
the.
if we could regulate, then we would have a regulated market. And that in turn, if we do it right and it's competitive, would largely put the black market out of business.
And you'd
But
also
without
be-
a regulated market, there's just recreational cannabis, people just go to illegal stores.
And you'd be able to tax the legal market and create another funding source for the district.
Yes. Now, I didn't mention that because in my view, that's not the primary goal here.
Understood, but versus having to expend money to go after the
Correct.
folks who are doing it illegally, you'd be able to at least get something from it. But the U.S. attorney won't help you or assist you in going after those illegal ones who are selling stuff potentially laced with fentanyl or other bad things.
Correct.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, might I just add, I want to be clear that the Metropolitan Police Department, along with our commission that regulates medical cannabis, is involved in a campaign right now to shutter illegal shops. And since they have been active in that space, we have issued dozens of citations and closed 14 illegal shops. And we will continue until we make sure that all of the businesses that are operating in the district related to cannabis are legal.
And I commend you for doing that, and also that crap that they're selling at gas stations to
Yes.
underage kids.
Yes.
That is also illegal. I'm sorry. I'll get off my soapbox. Mrs. Torres, we recognize you for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. That was a very important topic also. I want to also welcome you, Mayor Bowser, Chair Mendelson, and Chief Financial Officer Lee. Thank you for being with us here today. As a former 911 dispatcher and as a former mayor, I truly understand the importance of fully funding our police departments, especially here in our nation's capital. I cannot even imagine the work that you have to do with your hands literally tied behind your back, having Congress question and authorize your every single move. It is my understanding that this bill provides DC with $20 million less than requested for emergency planning and security costs. According to the bill report, emergency planning and security costs cover public safety efforts to provide support for the United States Secret Service and to respond to terrorist threats and attacks. I am greatly concerned for this committee's priority to defund our local law enforcement by $20 million critical dollars needed to keep us safe. On January 6, 2021, when a violent mob of insurrectionists attacked our nation's capital, it was DC police who answered our call for help. Let us not forget that there was a real attempt to hang the Republican vice president of the time. After January 6th, Congress should have learned our lesson about supporting DC's safety protocols. Once again, I am deeply, deeply troubled by this bill defunding the DC police. My questions are, I'd like to hear more background from you. Can you provide insight into how underfunding emergency planning and security costs will impact public safety in Washington, D.C., and your ability to support our Capitol Police during a time of urgent need?
Well, it affects our public safety ecosystem across all 8 wards, because what the chief of police will always do is fully deploy our police where needed. So if we're underfunded from what it costs us to do that from the federal government, it necessarily means that it's coming up from someplace else in our budget. Our budgets have to be balanced. We do have the ability to tap into our emergency reserves, but we also have to replenish those emergency reserves. So we cannot run at a deficit. So if we have $80 million over the last 4 years to support the federal government that were not reimbursed, it means it could have come from transportation, it could have come from schools, it could have come from supporting our local businesses and economic development. So it came from someplace else.
Including training the first responders that we need to support our nation's capital. Without fully funding emergency planning and security costs, how will DC prepare for the large upcoming security events? And I know you've covered a little bit of this, but from a very personal perspective, let me just share with you. When I attended Donald Trump's inauguration, I was wearing a vest, I was wearing a dress, and my guest was an elected official from my community. When I attended Joe Biden's inauguration, I was wearing a bulletproof vest and accompanied by a security guard. We cannot allow for this to happen again. So how are you tying the knots and ensuring that we have the support that we need?
Well, we're very confident in the United States Secret Service, who is the leader of all national special security events. As you know, I requested, and it was approved, that the January 6th, your proceedings here on January 6th, have now been designated a national special security event, also under the command and control of the Secret Service, which was different than the January.
Which means more overtime costs for you.
It could mean more overtime costs for us, for sure. And that's why, when we're talking about reimbursement, we're not suggesting that if this isn't all sorted out by January 20th, that we're going to short our support to the Secret Service, because
you.
we're going to be there.
Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Torres. We'll now recognize Mr. Womack.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a point of clarification before Ms. Torres leaves. Does she need to correct the record on a statement you made a minute ago about this committee defunding the DC police?
This committee will ultimately support the budget that we're proposing, and this committee is proposing $20 million.
Does this budget defund, as you say, the District of Columbia Metropolitan Police Force?
Absolutely. It defunds the Metropolitan Police Force by $20 million in preparedness dollars that they need.
I think there is a difference between saying we're defunding something, that's a declarative statement that suggests that we are taking all funds away from law enforcement in DC, and that is simply not true. Simply not true. So I personally would like for the record to be clarified on that. I won't belabor the point. I want to thank the panel for being here today. My first question is for the Chief Financial Officer. There's been a lot of discussion about work from home as it concerns the federal government. And a significant percentage of the federal government continues to work from home. I don't think there's any question that because there are nearly 800,000 jobs in the District of Columbia, and less than half of those jobs are filled by people who live in the District of Columbia.
That is correct.
That a significant number of people who fill jobs in the District of Columbia are working from home based on federal policy.
this has to concern anybody associated with DC government, because if you're working from home, you're not commuting, so WMATA is automatically affected, likely, bus service, transit services, those kinds of things. You're not eating in local restaurants, so those restaurateurs are impacted, not shopping in DC-related business. So this has a cascading effect. This is not just simply an issue of whether you should work from home or not, is it not?
Work from home, as the key statistic to think about is because we're an office-based economy, ultimately, people come here to work in offices. Our offices are utilized about 50% of what they were prior to the pandemic. That's not unusual across the country for major cities. And that then leads to the economic circumstances that I described. Very slow revenue growth. In particular, our property tax on commercial properties is actually declining fairly significantly. On the other hand, other revenues are buoying up our total revenue outlook. So the bottom line is remote work hinders the growth of our economy, our revenue streams, as it does most major cities across the country. So that is absolutely true.
Mr. Womack, if I could just add, so
Please do.
federal workers are not the majority of workers in the district, but they are a significant number. And when they don't come into work, it means, because many of them use WMATA or Metro, that means there are fewer riders on Metro, which is why Metro right now has a funding crunch. It means that these office buildings are vacant, and many of them are now the leases are being turned back, and so that means real property values have gone down and our real property tax has gone down. And then when workers are in their offices, many of them go out for lunch, or they go and buy something, a gift, or maybe they stick around for dinner or beer after work, and they're not, so our sales taxes are down. So it's hurting us in at least those three ways.
All right, so I would, and I'm a former mayor, and so this kind of stuff really interests me, because what impacts the city economically certainly has an impact on the DC government. Is it possible, Mr. Lee, that we haven't fully realized the impact of the commercial real estate bubble, as I call it?
Yes, we anticipate commercial values to continue to decline for 2 to 3 years, but frankly, we're in uncharted waters for commercial real estate in many central cities. We don't know in the longer run how the use of space will change with a much higher proportion of workers working remotely. So to the best of our ability, we're estimating a further decline, but we don't know whether that would actually, if it's not going to be worse than that.
Mayor, I'm going to ask you to weigh in here for a second. I know you don't like the federal government telling you guys how to operate, but I'm going to give you a chance to tell us how we should operate. Would you recommend to the bureaucracy, as it were, that people come back to work?
Thank you for that question.
That's a softball for you.
It's a softball. I'll take it. And this is how it would start. It's up to us to change our trajectory. So the CFO's responsibility is to estimate out over several years, and I think his estimates suggest that we haven't hit the bottom in commercial value decline, and maybe we would in a couple of years. But I take that as a challenge for our team to change our trajectory. The biggest thing that the federal government can do is have a centralized return to the office plan. It can be done. We did it. We have 37,000 employees in the District of Columbia. They came back to the office in June following the pandemic. We have a 4-day per week in-person policy. And quite frankly, the federal government's disparate policies, if you work for the IRS is this, if you work for energy is that, if you work for Treasury is something else, is problematic, not just for the federal employees, but also a lot of the private sector who say, this is what they say to me, we'll come back 5 days a week when the feds come back 5 days a week. And so we need a centralized policy that makes sense. And all of the things that my colleagues here have suggested will improve. But more than that, Mr. Womack, it's also important for us in the National Capital Region to say we're proud to host the federal government. We've built for many decades an infrastructure that supports a productive American workforce. And so we want to also have a very thoughtful conversation about how those federal agencies in the National Capital Region make sense for American productivity.
I appreciate the response. In the vernacular of softball, you hit that one out of the park.
Thank you.
I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Womack. Now recognize Mr. Bishop for his 5 minutes of
Thank
questions.
you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mayor Bowser, Mr. Lee, and Chairman Mendelson for your appearance today. I'm a strong proponent of home rule. Mayor Bowser and Mr. Lee, the House FSGG bill includes several policy provisions which either prohibit or restrict district funds from carrying out certain laws and policies. These laws and policies include abortion, reproductive health, vehicle emission standards, and even whether drivers are permitted to make a right turn at a red light. Broadly speaking, how do these provisions impact the day-to-day operations of the district government? And what impact do they have on the ability of the district to support and encourage economic activity? And then I have a second question I'll give you now. The President's budget for FY25, as well as the Senate Appropriations Committee, approved $40 million for the Tuition Assistance Grant Program. What will the impact of that? The House Appropriations Committee, of course, is only proposing $20 million for that program. So what will the impact of that 50% cut be in terms of the grants that the city will be able to provide to undergraduate district students to attend public universities and colleges nationwide? 2 questions.
Okay, so the first question, Mr. Bishop, about riders, we have addressed in some talking about the cannabis rider. The ATE rider, we think, has a deleterious effect on safety as it relates to traffic fatalities in the district. These measures have been carefully considered either by the council or DC voters, and we think those decisions need to continue to be made locally. The cannabis regulation, Mr. Mendelson has already talked about, but it's so important that we emphasize that a tax and regulatory scheme helps us promote safety for adult use. And to your point, Mr. Joyce, the voters did not approve non-adult use of possession or use of cannabis in the district. So it remains illegal for juveniles to use or possess cannabis in the district. But we feel very strongly that we can have a safe and legal structure for adult recreational use, building on what has been a successful medical use regime in the district for many years. And in speaking about earlier, it was mentioned that a shift in if we have to overspend in our federal support, our emergency public safety fund, it does have a pinch, or it could have a pinch on our ability to spend for the Metropolitan Police Department. So that's why having that increase is so important. As it relates to TAG, the Tuition Assistance Grant, I have to say it has been an incredible benefit for DC residents that has been supported by this Congress for many years. And while our students have the benefit of TAG, $10,000 that they can take to any public university or $2,500 to HBCUs, it also has a 50-state impact in that many states are receiving our students with that benefit. So it's not just the DC benefit, it's 50 states benefit from the infusion of tag. We think that we need to make, and we'll need your help with this, some changes to ensure that we're fully implementing tag. It's been $10,000 since its implementation. We know what the cost of higher ed have done over that same period of time. We know that now at least 60% of the tag recipients are using the full amount. And so when we increase with your support and go from $10,000 to $15,000 on the current budget trajectory, we'll be in the right place.
Mr. Bishop, if I could add, I know you're on the clock, but the challenge of governing is complex. And so let's just take traffic and traffic safety. There are many different policies to try to ensure that our roads are safe for everyone. One could disagree over different strategies, but ATE is part of our strategy. When there's a congressional rider that sort of swoops in, and just pulls out one piece of the strategy, it's not dealing with the complexity of the regulation. And that's part of the challenge. So not only is ATE important for our traffic safety in the district, but we're being handicapped, it's like one arm being tied behind our back because nothing's being done to deal with the rest of the problem.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can I just have about 10 seconds?
10 seconds are yours, sir.
All right. What about the 50% cut, proposed cut to the tag program?
We think that cutting tag by any amount will prevent us from making the necessary administrative changes that keep tag viable for DC residents in the 50 states.
Thank you, Mr. Sanford. Chair will now recognize Mr. Molnar for his questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, Mayor
Good morning.
and Mr. Lee and Chair Mendelson. Thank you for being here today. This year marked the 40th anniversary of sister city relations between Washington, D.C. and Beijing. And I'm very concerned about this relationship because, as you know, the Chinese Communist Party has become increasingly more aggressive at home and abroad. In Washington, D.C., people can openly petition their government, voice their opinion, and exercise their other rights under the First Amendment. Beijing embodies the opposite of these values, with no free expression and punishments for those who speak out. Just most recent example would be to see what's happening in Hong Kong with all the political prisoners there. Additionally, the Chinese Communist Party's United Front uses engagement, including sister city programs, to exert influence over foreign governments, officials, and businesses. Given the nefarious nature behind the sister city program, as well as the horrific human rights abuses perpetrated by the CCP, how do you justify continuing this relationship with Beijing?
Well, thank you for that question. And we have been active participants in the Sister City program with other capital cities around the world. I don't know how long this arrangement is with China, but it's probably a couple of decades old. And we're happy to review all of our relationships, but we do take a lot of signal from the United States Department of State. And that's a conversation that we'd be happy to have with them. We were pleased that Secretary Blinken created a division in the State Department that works with mayors and at our level. And I will tell you that a lot of our relationships related to Sister City are not high-level diplomacy. They're people-to-people strategies. So what can we learn from a Chinese school in Beijing? And some of our sister city relationships focus on healthcare. Others focus on cultural exchange. And we are proud to represent American values in all of those relationships. So the basis for all of our sister city agreements is how we can share the best of America and take from those relationships what helps help us on either cultural exchange or how we do business.
Okay, so you take, from what I can tell, you take a lot of direction from the Department of State. Is that what I'm hearing?
We certainly consult, and so if there,
Let me just,
yeah, sure.
So the Biden administration, as well as the Trump administration, both have declared a genocide being perpetrated by the Chinese Communist Party. Are you familiar with that?
I'm not familiar with us cutting off all diplomatic relations with
No, I didn't
China.
say that, but they've declared that there is a genocide occurring in China, specifically with respect to the Uyghur Muslim population. Both the Biden administration as well as the Trump administration have declared that.
As I said, I will be happy to review that in the context of what the basis of our relationship is.
Okay, I appreciate that because it gets even more complicated because throughout Washington DC, the propaganda arm of the Chinese Communist Party is distributing their China daily newspaper. And they have it in boxes all across the city. Are there regulations that determine what can be placed in different places around Washington DC?
I think all of the newspaper boxes there used to be many more newspaper boxes, and
Yeah,
we
it's
don't.
declining, I reckon.
Yes.
But I guess the question is, I'm wondering how much does the Chinese Communist Party pay for that communication?
None, nothing.
Who pays for the boxes throughout the?
You're bringing up something that I actually looked at a few years ago because we don't regulate, and it's very difficult for us to regulate because of First Amendment issues. So those boxes are placed without the district getting paid for them.
So they, okay.
But I haven't seen any of those boxes.
Well, I guess my question is, if it's an arm of the Chinese Communist Party, and they can put them anywhere in Washington DC, does that concern you?
It concerns me, and if nothing else, I think that there's what do I want to say, a visual neatness issue. I know you're getting at content. Content is very difficult for us to be able to regulate.
But I guess, and Mr. Chairman, if I might have a minute more to explore some of these. All right, thank you. So do you believe that the Chinese Communist Party has First Amendment rights here in Washington DC, similar to what other?
Well, I hate the way you phrase it, but I think the simple answer is that we as a government cannot discriminate based on content, whoever is saying whatever they're saying.
Okay, all right. Just one last question. In Michigan, my home state, we had a Chinese national, because we had same-day voter registration there. We had a Chinese national vote in the election illegally, and the ballot was never able to be retrieved, and so you had an illegal vote cast by someone of a foreign government representation. And Washington, D.C. offers same-day voting. You're also allowing people only to demonstrate that they're residents rather than citizens to vote. How would you protect federal elections? Because we contribute $500,000 towards federal, election grants for DC. How would you prevent a Chinese national from voting in a federal election here in Washington, D.C.?
Well, Congressman, we have a board of elections that operates independently. I appoint the commissioners to that board. I'm very proud of the way that they administer elections, and we've had a lot of reforms to the process that have opened up the franchise of voting, which we think is helpful to how we produce local policy and run our government. So the Board of Elections, they have really taken on the challenge of administering our elections in a fair, impartial way, and a transparent way.
Is it fair,
and
though, to
counting
have,
votes.
is it fair to have a Chinese national voting in an American federal election here in Washington, D.C.?
Only if a person qualifies can they vote.
Well, as you phrased it, I would say no. A Chinese national, then they would not be a
A
truly,
DC
yeah.
resident.
But how would you prevent that? If it's only proof of residency and a Chinese national is a resident here in Washington DC?
I don't want to speak for the Board of Elections, who has the responsibility for administering them, the rules. And they know the eligibility requirements for any voter. And I have to tell you, we don't get complaints about how our elections are administered. People can vote from home, they can go to their local voting centers, they can vote on paper, they can vote electronically at the vote centers. And what we're very proud of is at the end of the night, we know who won. And so I think DC residents feel very confident about how they vote in the district.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You've been very generous with your time. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And there seems to be some thought of maybe we're having so much fun here that we go into a second round of questions and recognize myself and start that process. And I'd like to follow up on where my distinguished colleague, Mr. Molnar, was. Can you make a distinction between how many, in the 2024 election, how many non-citizens versus citizens of the district voted?
I think we do know the number of non-citizens who registered. 523 out of, I don't know, how many hundreds of thousands, 200,000 voters.
That's pretty quick.
Yeah.
What distinction do you make between those things that are in DC and a federal election?
Well, the Board of Elections has the ability on the spot at our voting centers to be able to give you the ballot that you're eligible for. For example, if I voted outside of my home precinct, which I did, and I'm only going to get the ballot. Therefore, my ward representative is on my ballot. My advisory neighborhood commissioner is on my ballot, not someone else's. Similarly, the board can produce a ballot that you're eligible for, so the federal offices would not appear on your ballot if you're not eligible.
So do you believe that non-citizens should have the ability to vote in your elections?
The council has passed the bill. I would have suggested that residents, we have a lot of long-term residents here who have the ability to work. They have work permits. And that's one level of identification that I think is well proven. And we have a lot of our residents who came to the district with temporary protective status. Now, I know there will be a big discussion over immigration reforms, and we look forward to participating in that because we think that people who live here, who pay taxes here, who raise their families here, who have mortgages here, who have jobs here, and have been here and have come here with temporary protective status and other means should have a pathway to citizenship. Those residents participating in a local election, I think makes our process better.
Chair Mendelson, do you share the same beliefs? I don't want to pit you against each other, but.
Well, and you won't. And I also am the chair of the council, which adopted the legislation. Where we come from, our perspective is that these individuals who may not be United States citizens still are residents of the district. And they participate, as the mayor said. We want them to participate, if for no other reason than public safety purposes. If there is some illegal activity or domestic violence, we want them to feel that they can report that. We need them to report that. And so we try not to discriminate against them. And if they are participating in our city, then because we provide city services, we feel that they should have a voice in the election of the city. But we make that distinction. I said it the way I did because we're not saying they should participate in federal elections.
So does council participate in the integrity of elections, or as far as making sure that?
Sort of in the same way that you do, we have oversight. And we have hearings, and so we hear whether there are complaints or problems. So we have heard complaints and problems about the speed of elections, vote counting, and complaints about lines at some of the precincts, but we've not heard complaints about illegal voting.
Okay. And just to clarify, Mayor, when I was talking about the crap that kids get, I was talking about like Delta 8, and those
Delta
things that, the hemp-type products that
Yep.
are not being, they put it out there as being THC, but it's actually coming from China
Yep.
or somewhere else, and these are chemicals, it's not any type of grown thing
Yep.
that is something that we all should be making sure. I know in my state of Ohio, it's now an active thing going on in the House and the Senate to try to rid those places from those, because those people are not making any distinction whether or not they're selling to kids. They're just selling,
Yes.
and it's crap.
It's crap. And I totally agree with you on that. We've been fighting all types of synthetic substances that have been sold. And some, like, is not only crap, some of it is deadly.
Right.
And so we know we don't want our kids or adults buying off market where we can't assure the authenticity of the product.
So if we could regulate, we'd have seed to sale, but we can't regulate. Where there have been enforcement efforts against these illegal gifting shops, there's sometimes been testing by the government, and we have found almost always that there are other substances mixed in with the cannabis. And we've also, as I mentioned before, found other drugs that are being sold in those establishments.
Thank you, and I applaud your efforts on that. I would defer to my dear friend, Mr. Hoyer, for any questions he might have.
Thank you very much. First of all, general question. There are 89 provisions in our fiscal year 25 bill which deal with directing you to do something or to prohibiting you from doing something that you wanted to do. How inimical is that to your governing the District of Columbia? And for instance, these provisions do not relate to my telling Mississippi citizens what to do, or Iowa citizens what to do, or for that matter, Maryland citizens what to do. What impact does that have on you on an annual basis in trying to deal with these?
Well, we've talked quite a bit about the policy riders, Mr. Hoyer, that I think are an affront to kind of our democratic principles. Our residents don't understand it, and in some cases, we think that it prevents us from making the best decisions for the district, or spending a lot of time kind of fighting about it and explaining or over-explaining, explaining again why we need to have control of our transportation policies to protect residents of the district. What we rather be doing is talking about the things that we can work on together that we know with your influence we can change, like a centralized return to the office policy for the federal government, because a lot of the things that the CFO has mentioned about declining commercial property values can be impacted by such a change. But there are other things we've outlined in our policy. We don't expect to go back to 2019 in terms of commercial utilization. And I don't know that we expect the federal government to all of a sudden use some of the underutilized buildings. So another thing that we can work on together is what the process is for underutilized buildings. If there is a change in the amount of federal jobs in the National Capital Region, we think it would be akin to a base closing. And the impact that we have seen just with remote work is akin to 20 bases closing. And we know when that happens, the federal government steps up with a BRAC process, the base realignment, with support, financial assistance, worker retraining assistance, all of those things that would accompany such a huge federal decision that impacts the local economy. So we have several buildings that we think are prime candidates for realignment that we like to work with you on. But I think a larger discussion when it comes to our budget, which I might add, what we're talking about in this federal payment is not the $21 billion budget that is raised from DC taxpayers. It is the amount that we need from the feds to support federal purposes. And so I really would like to identify ways that we can talk about how we support a return to the office and how we repurpose federal buildings and what the federal government's role should be in what we've lost.
So there are a lot of opportunities, as I said at the end of my written statement, where we could be working together on issues. But to speak to your question, I didn't like how I phrased my answer earlier to Mr. Bishop, but when I said that governance is actually quite complex, I tried to illustrate it with the ATE process and traffic safety, but I could give some other examples. Cannabis, where we're seeing it counterproductive in terms of public safety. A rider from years ago that's not in place now, thankfully. Remember the prohibition on needle exchange? And as a consequence, we led the country in terms of HIV/AIDS rate. That was public health. And so if you are going to step in and say we can't do one strategy, well, what are the other strategies? That's what I meant by governance is complex. And so we put together different policies or strategies to affect traffic safety, or for public safety and regulating cannabis, or in the case of needle exchange for dealing with HIV/AIDS. And these riders have the effect of just pulling out a piece and leaving us with trying to figure out how to put back together the fabric of what we're trying to deal with, public health, public safety, whatever.
Appreciate that very much. I have been concerned.
You're on.
Well, I may be off, but on the mic. I continue to be concerned, and the carrying of guns on the Western Metropolitan Area Transit Authority is particularly one that has concerned me and has been continues to be imposed, as if the laws governing guns should be applied on a citizen of the District of Columbia in every other state. So that if the District of Columbia were more narrow or more broad, that would be applicable in the receiving state of the citizen. If you get we have a lot of people come here. Uniformity of laws would be, I think, very helpful in this regard, so that everybody coming here would know what the rules are. You're coming to the nation's capital, or you're going to New York City, or going to LA, or going to Chicago. That their rules would be applicable, as opposed to us, in effect, imposing on the District of Columbia rules that we like better than apparently the citizens or the governing body of the District of Columbia like and think are furtherance of the public safety.
I tried to stay away from gun control issues because I know it's a hot button issue, but I think you're touching on that. When I chaired our Judiciary Committee, I realized that most folks who have guns are law-abiding. They're people we don't have to worry about. But there are folks who are not law-abiding, and that's what we're trying to figure out how to deal with, which is why we have the regulations we have. And I totally get it that folks who are in Wyoming or Western Michigan grew up with guns, they understand guns, they know gun safety. Those are not people who live in urban jurisdictions. And so that's just another area where, well, if Congress is going to step in, well, how do we deal with the greater complexity of gun violence? How do we ensure that our homicides go from 190 this year, that's where I think we'll end up, down to 100 as opposed to going up?
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll move on out to Ms. Henson.
Thank you. If we want to have a conversation about concealed carry reciprocity, I think Iowans would be open to that. And we have a lot of big cities in Iowa. I would invite you to come visit Cedar Rapids, where I live. It is a great town, and we have great, safe people who respect our gun safety laws in Iowa. Mayor Bowser, I want to come back to a conversation again we've had about remote work for employees. I want to thank you for highlighting the importance of an in-person federal workforce. We had before this committee several administrators come in and testify they had work from home policies that required people to only be in the office 1 day a week, which is frankly unacceptable. And Congress has passed the Show Up Act, so we actually tried to take action on that to force people back. So I think that you'll see some action on that, hopefully in the next Congress, where there will be a change there. So are you ready for that? I guess is the next question, because when you think about all, if those people are required on January 20th to show up to work, what's that change going to be like for the city?
Yes, we are ready. Yes, we are ready. And in fact, we have had that conversation with Metro. I think the biggest impact would be on our public transportation system. And unlike some places, Metro has leaned into frequency, leaned into more and optimized bus routes so that we are prepared to carry our workers, visitors, and residents.
Speaking of changes coming in the next Congress, you talked about immigration reform and working with Congress on that, but I think it goes without saying there is going to be some deportation activity happening. Are you planning to comply with ICE detainer orders should those come to your police department?
We will follow the law.
Does the city's funding request reflect all your needs for enforcing that and following those laws?
It reflects the current law, yes.
Do you anticipate that you'll have additional expense there?
I don't, as long as the current law is in place, I think that we are funded to handle that.
Okay, well, let's get people back to work and let's continue to follow the law. And I just want to close, Mr. Chairman, with something I know I heard a number of my colleagues commenting on DC statehood today, and I do believe it is simply a ploy for Democrat control here in Congress. I think it is an effort to get the votes to stack the Supreme Court and enact a radical policy agenda, and I cannot support that. I think Americans made it very clear in this last election that they want to see DC be more like a state like Iowa, and that is what I will continue to support. I think it's important that you are able to execute these policy priorities as we've discussed here today, but I don't think it was ever an intention for DC to be a state, and I will yield back with that closing remark.
Thank you, Ms. Hinton. Chair will now recognize Mr. Molnar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just wanted to follow up briefly. And I recognize, the sister city partnership with Beijing goes back 40 years. And I think most people were very hopeful about China. And 40 years ago, 30 years ago, the idea was they were going to become more freedom-loving, more democratic, more a responsible player on the world stage, and what we've seen is really just the opposite. Would you agree with that?
Well, what I will say, Congressman, is I didn't come prepared to talk
Okay.
about China or a sister city relationship, so I don't want to be argumentative or restate what I've already said.
Yeah.
I would like the opportunity to go back and review some of your questions.
Thank you. And just one thing to kind of think about, because you are the leader of a city that's known throughout the world.
Yes.
I don't think you would have had a sister city relationship with Pretoria, South Africa during the apartheid regime. That would be an assumption on my part. I don't think you would have had a sister city relationship with Berlin during Nazi Germany. I think those are fair assumptions. I guess the question I would ask for you and the council to consider is, are Beijing's actions consistent with what should be our nation's capital and a sister city relationship?
And I think those are fair questions. And as I sit here, one way I would approach it, and I haven't in the 10 years I've been mayor, but my staff will tell you I'm very, and these are the words I use, stingy with our sister city relationships. We're called on multiple times throughout the year, ambassadors, mayors, come to my office and ask to be sister cities with us. I think that I maybe have added 1 or 2 new relationships in 10 years. So we take the responsibility very seriously. And the thing that I might consider as I sit here, but again, I want to review it, is just instituting on a schedule, a review process of those relationships to check in on the status of it.
Okay.
I think that would be a reasonable way to approach it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And I yield back.
Relatively painless, and I know that our time is up. I know you've had much fun here, but
Yes, it's good.
with that, some of the members on the committee may want to submit questions for the record, and so we'd ask that please submit any questions for the record for the subcommittee staff within the next 7 days. With that, I'd like to thank you all for
you,
being
Mr.
here,
Chairman.
for your time today, and we're going to do this again. So we're not going to do it every 15 years. We're going to do it again. And to all you who came to support, the people that you have here are witnesses today. Thank you for being here today and your input. It's not often we have such a full gallery and when it comes to meetings like this. So thank you for being here as well. And with that, the subcommittee stands adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.